on Facebook as well as recording it on Zoom, and it will be recorded up on Facebook a few minutes after our webinar concludes, and we will have it up on our website as well as YouTube by the end of the week for those of you that would be interested in sharing it with individuals you think may benefit from this webinar. Also, I welcome you to ask questions throughout the webinar. We are managing the chat box here on Zoom, so you can use the chat box or the question and answer box on Zoom to ask your questions. And on Facebook, please use the chat box and we will get those questions asked and answered. And I do have a poll at the end of this webinar, so if you could take a few moments at the end and answer the 8 short questions for our purposes, that would be great. A lot of us that are participating in this webinar today are nonprofit grant-funded individuals, and so your feedback is very important for us to provide our funders so we can continue to offer information like this free to families and providers. So with that, we're also live streaming on Facebook, just so that you're aware that this is being live streamed on Facebook. With that, I'd like to introduce our presenters today. Joining us today, we have Lauren Mille. She's a lawyer from Disability Rights Maine. Marco Orlando, a self-advocate from Speaking Up for Us. Alan Kurtz, Center for Community Inclusion and Disability Studies. Kathy Adams, Maine Site Director. And Rachel Dyer, the Associate Director for the Maine Disabilities Council. And I will kindly turn it over to you guys to start your presentation. Thank you all for joining us today.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Lauren Willey from Disability Rights Maine. And Marco, I can see you've successfully unmuted yourself.
Yes, thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Marco Orlando. I represent Speaking Up for Us.
And I am going to share a screen. Let's see if I can do this. Okay. So Marco and I are going to be talking today about self-advocacy as a solution. Marco, I'm going to let you go ahead and talk a little bit about who you are and Speaking Up for Us.
Yes, Speaking Up for Us is the self-advocacy organization here in the state of Maine. Every state has one, and they all call it something different. I know a lot of people go by People First, but here in Maine, we're known as Speaking Up for Us. And basically, our purpose is to try and make life better for everyone with a disability in all aspects of their everyday lives. And being able to speak up for yourself and being able to advocate for yourself and what you need has always been among our main goals. Trying to think where else. Trying to think. Yeah. Anyway.
Marco, how long have you been involved with Speaking Up for Us?
Oh, since October 2012, I started getting involved with that.
Great. So my name is Lauren Willey. I am a staff attorney here at Disability Rights Maine. Disability Rights Maine is Maine's designated protection and advocacy agency. So that means that we work to protect and advocate for civil rights for people with disabilities. We have a lot of different teams at Disability Rights Maine. I work on the developmental disabilities team. So I work specifically with adults and children as well with developmental disabilities. And we work to educate, to give information, and to enforce and expand people's rights. So I think we're going to move on here. Just before, I guess, we really sort of dive in, Marco and I are hoping that we're going to get some sort of participation. I don't, this is one of the first times I've done a Zoom training, but we're hoping to get some participation and discussion with the participants here. So that is our hope. And so if you feel like you want to engage in the conversation, we would encourage you to do that. Marco, I'm going to let you take it away.
All right. we'd like to pose the question, what are some barriers that people with disabilities are currently facing in getting the services that they need that can promote independence and productivity in their communities, the communities they live in?
So I'm unable to see the chat, but
yeah, so I was just going to jump in. So please, oh, I have Kyle Pelletier who's raising his hand, so I can unmute Kyle so that he can share. We can do it that way. You can raise your hand and I can unmute you, or if you would like to share in the chat box, I can share what you are sharing in the chat box. But I am unmuting Kyle. Right. Kyle, you are unmuted and you can share.
Well, one of the barriers that we have, it's like most with like transportation and a lack of respect that we have from services. That's another one.
Yes. Two very important ones that come up for us a lot, at least in my work. Thanks, Kyle.
Problem.
Thank you, Kyle. In the chat box, Kathy Adams says some people may lack info, or is that Kathy? Some people may lack info about available services. Michelle says long waiting lists for accessing mental health help, both medicines and therapy. Sorry, it keeps jumping on me. Lisa says there seems to be a stigma when asking for help. Amanda says transportation to non-Maine Care funded community activities. Annette says accessing the waiver services and long waiting lists. That's what I have so far.
There seems to be some recurring themes going here.
Yeah, what do you hear, Marco, that's recurrent?
Well, one person did touch on it. There is still a negative stigma attached to folks with disabilities. There's a lot of preconceived notions out there about who we are, what they think that we're capable of. Transportation's a big one, especially up north and down east, points north and east of Bangor. That seems to be an issue.
Yeah.
Southern Maine, it's really bad, so I'm told. Portland, Lewiston, Auburn.
Yeah. What struck me also was lack of information about services. I think that sometimes when people are sort of seeking the support that they need, they just don't know what's out there to ask for. And so I think hopefully this webinar will provide a small tip of the iceberg of what is available out there, but it's important to know what's available when you're
You do raise
services.
a valid point, I must say, regarding not knowing what's out there. Not a lot of people know what speaking up for us is. And I know here in the Bangor Brew area where I'm from, there's still a lot of unknowns about our organization and what we do. And we're trying to expand upon some community outreach efforts that way.
So we have a couple more hands raised and then a couple more items in the chat box. So to the chat box first, accessing the waiver services and long wait lists, transportation in rural areas is just unavailable, and funding for services and staff needed for direct services. So I have Sally Hinckley, who was interested in sharing, and Sally, you unmute. Oops, it won't let me unmute you, Sally. Oh, there you go, Sally. You're unmuted. You're unmuted, and you can go ahead and share.
Yes, I am here. My question is mostly regarding guardianship. I know that the coming trend, and I agree with it, is that people retain their own manage their own decisions without having a guardian. What I would like to do, since I have no one to follow me for my daughter, who is 58, I'm 83, there is no guardian in sight after I'm gone, and I don't see that changing. So I am hoping to form a safety net of people who can be called upon for various help should my daughter need it. She does qualify for subsidized housing, and here in South Portland we have lots of it all over the city. But my question is, how in the world am I going to get someone to be a fiduciary? And that really is a guardian when it comes to taking care of her resources. She has a special needs trust that does not supplant her income from the government, which would be Social Security. It supplements that so that she is able to have a dog and money to take care of her pet and money for health and beauty aids, whatever. So my whole focus right now, at least in the near future, is to do as much as I can to make sure there is a safety net in place for her. Do you have any ideas about this situation?
Yes, thank you for that question. You know, without sort of going too far in sort of specific legal advice, some of the things that jumped out at me from your question are that there are a lot of options. One of the first things that came to my mind is supported decision-making, which is a way to really kind of work on a plan to help a person with a disability make their own decisions with supports in place. I know you mentioned sort of preparing kind of a network of people to kind of help your daughter. And so that sort of segues perfectly in, I think, into the idea of supported decision-making. We have a Disability Rights Maine's developed a guide for supported decision-making. When I'm done sharing my PowerPoint and can access the chat box, I can provide the link to access that guide as well. But there's also other, and the guide mentions this too, but there's also other things that can be put into place to protect, for instance, financial interests. There's the idea of representative payees, powers of attorney. I'm not going to go too far into sort of the legal underpinnings, but there are a lot of services in place that could help a person make their own decisions while still protecting their finances or whatever it is that you're seeking to sort of put in place for protection. So that's a very generalized answer.
Maine Parent Federation also does a specific supported decision-making webinar and training, and we've actually recorded the webinar and have it up on our website. I'll provide that link in the chat box. We also have a booklet that we could mail out to you if you wanted to give our offices a call, or I'll provide Tara Embry's email address in the chat box as well. You could email her and she could mail you out an information packet about supported decision-making, including the booklet. And so I will put both Tara's email address and the link to the supported decision-making recording in the chat box for you as well.
Marco, I didn't give you, I'm sorry, I'm a talker. I didn't give you a chance to sort of provide any feedback.
There are a lot of questions. I know in the past, it seemed like parents of children with disabilities, it seemed like they were in a rush to apply for guardianship right when they turn 18. And I kind of go back and forth on it. I mean, I understand meaning well. I understand having good intentions. I know for me personally, it kind of feels like having the legs cut out from underneath you before you're really given a chance to prove that you can make informed adult decisions. And I mean, I see both sides of it, honestly.
Yeah, I think that's an important perspective, Marco. So I don't know if there's much more in terms of in the chat box for this slide. We can move on. I see Carrie shaking her head now. So
yeah, apply some of what we're talking about to more current events. The coronavirus, some of the issues around the coronavirus. What are folks with disabilities currently facing for issues regarding the coronavirus?
I feel like people that have disability are facing like they are facing that they are going back of being like left behind, being disrespect, and I feel that all issues that people with disabilities have are being pushed aside because it's this Corona-19.
So in the chat box, we have Pamela who says there's no in-home care, and Sarah says loss of the little bit of income that they had, not being able to see their therapists, counselors, advocates in person, etc. Fighting isolation. We've also heard at Maine Parent Federation feeling like they don't have a voice at the table where decisions are being made at a legislative level and leadership level. Darren Todd would like to talk, so I'm going to unmute. Oops, so he lowered his hand. He keeps, oh, hold on, Darren. I'm going to unmute you. Oh, you're jumping around on me for some reason. Okay. Unmute. Now. Okay, Darren, you're unmuted. Go ahead. Maybe while we wait, Amanda also says lack of technology to participate in telehealth activities, specifically noticed in group homes. And is it Darian or Darren or Darian? Did you want to say something? You're unmuted. You can talk if you'd like to.
You mean Sally? Yes, we don't have any issues around the virus as far as my daughter goes, because she lives here at home, and we live in a neighborhood that has her back, and a neighborhood where people help each other out. And so Diana is quite busy taking care of dogs and cats and helping other people. So she is in a good place, and that's probably rare at this point, but she's very lucky.
Yes.
We have Lisa says, I wear over the ear hearing aids and find wearing masks hinder my ability to hear. It's impossible to speech read with a mask covering faces, so I feel that I have to make a hard choice. Darian, hold on, let me try to unmute you again. It looks like you got muted again. He's asking if we could hear him, and we couldn't hear you. Having a hard time unmuting you for some reason. And then, hold on. Amanda says, agencies not wanting to allow individuals to use their internet to participate in telehealth. And Darian, I'm having a hard time unmuting you for some reason. If you wanted to share your thoughts in the chat box, I'd be happy to read them. That's all we have for right now.
Yes, those are very helpful, and most of the ones I think that Marco and I had come up with. Marco, what are your thoughts? Do you think that any ones were missed?
Well, those are all valid concerns. It feels like you can never be too careful during times like these, during a pandemic. Seems like, I don't know.
One
I
of
kind
the
of go
things,
back and forth on it.
Yeah, one of the things you had brought up, Marco, when we originally talked was one of the issues was sort of conflicting information or misinformation that was out there. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I spend a fair amount of time online doing the social media, social networking thing, and there's a lot of information coming out about COVID-19 or the coronavirus, as I call it. I've noticed as we've gone along, some stuff tends to contradict with some other stuff that's been said about it. And it makes it hard to know what to believe or really making sure that we're getting the most accurate information from the most reputable sources. I mean, I get that not everyone's going to agree on things from a political standpoint. And I know some people try to make a political issue out of the coronavirus. But there are experts in their respective fields, and we have to believe that they're acting in good faith here.
Yeah. I know, Marco, you had said, and this is something that I also hear from other clients that I work with, is there's not always sort of universal guidance. So like different places or
I've noticed that a lot of
might be
provider
having
agencies are kind of going off and doing their own thing. And I know that there's been some questions around specific guidelines around reopening, trying to get things back to the way things used to be, kind of streamlining that process.
Yeah, the lack of consistency, I think, can be confusing for
Yes.
everybody.
And I'm a stickler for consistency as it is.
So I think we're going to move on to the next slide, I think. So I think just to kind of take a step back for kind of what we're talking about today. So I think it's really helpful to sort of identify some of these barriers, because what Marco and I want to sort of talk a little bit about is sort of our PowerPoint is entitled Self-Advocacy as a Solution.
Right.
And it's really about empowering people with disabilities to sort of help overcome these barriers, right?
Yes.
So, I've got a little bit.
Can we just give Darian one more chance? I think I've got him unmuted, and we'll give it a go here.
Please.
You're unmuted if you wanted to share.
Okay, thank you sorry for the whole technology thing. My computer's been acting weird, but I'm gonna go ahead and say what I want to say about the COVID-19, how is it affecting people with disabilities. I think it's affecting them a lot because some of them won't go back to a job, and some of them that want to go to work, they feel uncomfortable going back to work because they have people at home to care for, and I guess the people at work are not understanding that if they don't come in, they're just going to automatically lose their job. They don't want to come in because what happened if they get the COVID and bring it back home? That's just spreading it to their family members, and no one wants to do that. So I don't feel like it's true. I feel like it's not right to just take their jobs away because they don't feel comfortable going back into work. So I think that's one of the things that they are facing, that COVID-19 is struggling for, why people with disabilities and COVID-19 is having trouble with this, going back to work and thinking about, should I go back to work? But if I don't, will I still have one? You know, it's like that constant thinking. If I don't go back to work, will I still have a job? And that's kind of scary to think about when you have children of your own and you're coming back from work with a whole lot of people that might not have COVID or might do have COVID. That's like a scary situation to think about and bring that back home to your loved ones.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm so glad you were able to be unmuted to share that with us. Employment is a huge sort of area that there's just so much uncertainty, I think. in terms of, are the jobs still going to be there? How to make a decision whether or not to return to work. And it's very tricky. And I think a lot of people are struggling with sort of balancing health and safety with sort of employment and community access and earning a living and supporting yourself and your family. And those are really hard questions that I think we're all trying to grapple with.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in for everybody, I think.
Yeah. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to move on. So this might seem sort of obvious, but we're going to name it anyway. We want to just talk for a minute about why is self-advocacy important, right? I think, you know, why do we have organizations like SUFU? Why do we want to promote self-advocacy, right? So
yeah, and why do we have these other allies? Why do we have these other supports in place, like Disability Rights Maine, like the Maine Developmental Disabilities Council?
Yep. So Marco and I came up with some bullet points on why we think self-advocacy is important. Marco, I'm going to let you go through those.
Yeah, it gives you a sense of empowerment. At least it does for me. It also helps people improve upon communication skills. It helps promote self-determination and helps people make their own informed adult decisions. It can also combat some assumptions that people may have about folks with disabilities, who we are, what they think we're capable of, whether we can stand up for ourselves, whether we can advocate for our own needs.
Yeah. I think one of the things that maybe I left off of this slide is sort of, I think, the mission statement of SUFU, which is sort of nothing about us without us, right?
Yeah, that kind of harkens back to the initial disability rights efforts federally here back in the 60s and 70s, folks like Judy Henge, folks like Ed Roberts. That kind of put those wheels in motion back then.
Yeah. So I think, you know, that self-advocacy is important because we need to hear the perspective of the people at the center of what we're talking about, right?
Yeah,
that's
the folks on the front
crucial.
lines.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about a little bit about we're going to dig in a little bit with self-advocacy. So we're going to talk for a few minutes about person-centered planning and self-advocacy. I'm just going to bring the whole slide up. Okay. So the two questions that we sort of raised in this slide, what is person-centered? What does that mean? And how can a person use person-centered planning to promote self-advocacy? Maybe that should be reversed. Maybe how can self-advocacy be used to promote person-centered planning?
Right.
So
Yeah,
Marco,
it could go either way, I guess, when you put it like that. Because you really can't have one without the other.
Yeah. So what does person-centered mean to you, Marco?
And Marco, when you're answering that question, Kathy also wants to know how early in life do you think individuals should be learning self-advocacy skills? So if you could think about that when you're answering the question, that would be great.
Yeah. I'd say around high school age, like, at least that's when I was first made aware that, hey, I'm growing up and I'm kind of going to need to have something in place here after I get out of high school. At least that's how it was in my case. I don't know if that's applicable to everybody, but that would be a general guideline, because I know that that transition age is crucial. But person-centered planning for me, means I should have pretty much have say so over what goes in it, the goals and objectives I want to reach, the goals and objectives that I want to set for myself in different aspects of my life. And it's going to look different to everybody because everyone's at a different level of functioning. Everyone's operating on a completely different plane. And that's no knock against them, just explaining how things are.
Yeah, I think that's great. Oh,
Darian has his hand raised again. If we can allow him to share once again, I think he's unmuted.
Yes. Hi. What does person-centered planning means to me? I started person-centered planning when I was in high school, and along with self-advocating, that gave me the platform to advocate for what I wanted for myself out of high school, and then had that experience to go to college was the icing on the cake. So I think people should really try to engrave that in high school students at the later than freshman year, because if they don't somehow start advocating for themselves, it's gonna be hard for them to do that when they get to college, because all you doing in college is advocating for yourself and telling them what you need to be done. So I think they need to start that at a very early age, and it really helps them along the way when they start learning advocating skills. And I know it helped me, and person-centered parenting is a very, very good way to help them set goals for themselves. And when they set those goals for themselves, they see themselves accomplishing those goals when they're done setting them. So that's all I had to say on that note.
Thank you so much. That is, I agree with everything that you just said. I will actually even take it a step further to the question that Kathy asked and say, it is never too early to start helping someone learn to be. I have a 5-year-old son, and I am already planting the seeds. You know, for example, when we go to the doctor, before we go to the doctor, I say, what are the questions that you want to have for the doctor? Because I want you to ask them. Or if you're having a fight with one of your friends, what can you do? Go back there and think about a way to solve it yourself. So I think it's never too early to start. I think I think high school, and when someone's beginning to reach the age of majority, you're really stepping it up, right? You're really trying to kind of make sure that a person knows how to be a self-advocate. But I think you can start encouraging that from birth.
You can start encouraging it early, and you can also have it written into IEP plans. So for those parents or case managers or providers, professionals, educators who might be joining us, self-advocacy goals should be in a child's IEP plan as soon as they qualify for special education, or even a 504 plan. Those are things that you can put in a 504 plan that encourages the student to ask for their accommodations and modifications and have an understanding for what they need in order to be able to access their education. Because once they start practicing those skills, and school is the ideal area to start practicing those school skills, it becomes second nature to them.
Yeah. And person-centered to me, you know, really means, I mean, exactly what it says, person-centered. So, you know, I attend a lot of person-centered planning meetings, and I feel like the first instinct of the team on any topic should be asking the person, what do they want to talk about at this meeting? Letting them run the meeting if that's what they want to do, making sure the meeting is accessible to them, asking them first, what do they think about this a topic? What, you know, when you're problem solving, always asking the person first. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on to the next slide because I want to make sure that we have time for everyone else to kind of have a chance to present. So another topic where self-advocacy, I think, is really important is in reasonable accommodations. Marco, I'll let you take it away.
Right. For those who aren't familiar, the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into law back in 1990 under the Bush 41 administration. Basically requires employers, public services, and certain private businesses to make reasonable accommodations that allow people with disabilities equal access as those who may not have one. And sometimes they have to change the rules a little bit to accommodate them.
Yep, and I'm going to move on to the next slide in a second because it's more about reasonable accommodations. But an accommodation sort of by definition is saying, I need something a little bit different than what is typically offered so that I can have the same, I'm able to experience this the same as a person that doesn't have a disability, or I'm able to sort of take part in community life in the same way that people that don't have disabilities. So it's about
basically
equity.
leveling the playing field for them.
Exactly.
That's how it ought to be.
So how to ask for a reasonable accommodation. And some of this I took from the wonderful suggestions and video from Green Mountain Advocates, which is the self-advocacy organization in Vermont. They made a wonderful video about specifically about asking for reasonable accommodations related to COVID. A lot of hospitals and doctors' offices have rules in place, and understandably so, limiting visitors, limiting people that can come into hospitals and offices with you. And so that's one example of a reasonable accommodation, is that a hospital might have a rule that you have to be alone in the hospital, but a person with a disability might need a support person. They might need a support person to help them communicate to doctors, to help them sort of understand and process information. And so that's one type of reasonable accommodation a person with a disability can ask for. They can say, I need a support person with me at my doctor's appointment, or if I'm in the hospital. And the Americans with Disabilities Act requires hospitals to accommodate. So these are just some tips on how to ask for an accommodation. So you want to tell the person or the hospital or the doctor's office or whoever, it could be any kind of entity, that you need a reasonable accommodation. You want to,
Lauren.
yes.
Lisa's asking, would a face shield be a reasonable accommodation? My guess is instead of a face mask, because the mask might be too constricting, asking for a face shield instead.
Yeah, it could be. That could absolutely be a type of reasonable accommodation. I can't give an absolute guarantee in any given situation, but the basis of a reasonable accommodation means it's necessary to accommodate a person with a disability, and it has to be reasonable, right? So that sounds perfectly reasonable to me. And so certainly I think, yes. And so a face shield is a good example. The second bullet point is you need to think in advance, what is the accommodation you're asking for? What's the obstacle you're facing? And what's the thing you're asking for? As a lawyer, we always say, what's our ask? What are we asking for? We can't just say there's a problem. We have to kind of at least pose a solution to it. Explain why you need the accommodation. So for example, I need help communicating with my doctor, or I need help. I need a person with me because I have very high anxiety in a doctor's office, and I need a person to help me. So you don't have to be specific about what your disability is. So you don't, in other words, need to tell the hospital. I mean, the hospital will probably know anyway, but the restaurant or the wherever you're talking to, you don't need to say, well, this is my diagnosis and here are my medical records. You just need to be able to say, I have a disability, I need this accommodation to help me communicate, or whatever it may be. Okay.
Lauren, just a quick
Yes.
question. So Lisa sort of followed up on a question. So would face shields be a reasonable accommodation to ask for other employees to wear if you have an individual that has a hearing impairment in your office because they have to read lips and can't read lips with a mask?
I mean, again, I can't absolutely guarantee that, but to me, the advice I would always give someone is you ask. The answer can always be no, and that no can be challenged if in fact it is a reasonable accommodation you're asking for. But I always think it can never hurt to ask. So if that's something that you think you need and that seems absolutely reasonable, I know someone brought that up earlier as a barrier. People that are deaf or hard of hearing have issues with masks because they often rely on facial expressions and lips. So I always think, you know, like it says here on the slide, be specific about what you're asking for, but ask. And that might start a dialogue. The hospital or whoever you're asking might say, sure, but you have to, you know, we don't have masks, you have to provide your own face shield or, you know, something like that. But asking is always the first step. Okay, we're going to talk about self-advocacy and grievances.
Yeah. By law, you are allowed to file a grievance if necessary. You have the right to challenge any action or perceived inaction of the Department of Health and Human Services or any service provider that affects a person's life. And there are also, individuals that are under guardianship can also file a grievance in court if they want to challenge their guardianship or if they're not happy with how things are going in their life that way.
Yep, so these are two different rules. So the first rule is that anybody that received developmental services, they have a right under the law to file a grievance. And that's a really broad right. You can file a grievance for almost anything that someone's doing or not doing that you have a problem with. It doesn't always mean you're going to win the grievance, but you have a right to file the grievance, and it's a pretty easy thing to do. There is a form that's available on the department's website, but the form just basically says all you really need to do to file a grievance is basically communicate what you have a problem with and how would you like that problem to be solved. And then there's a whole procedure that I'm not going to get into right now about how sort of a grievance works its way through the system. The idea being that you try to resolve it informally first. So if you're having a problem with the department or your service provider, the first step is really to have a conversation and see if you can resolve it. And the guardianship, grievances under guardianship. So this is sort of a new thing. We overhauled the probate code, Maine did, and it went into effect in September. And it gives people that are subject to guardianship a right to file a grievance in court against their guardians. I've not seen it used too much, but it is an option that is available for people under guardianship.
Mm-hmm.
So just some other tips for self-advocacy that we came up with.
Yes. Basically, don't be afraid to ask for what you want. That's the first one. Having a clear idea of what you're asking for, making it pretty clear what you want, what you're asking for, knowing who to turn to with any issues you might have, and using the method that you're most comfortable with.
Yep. And I added that last one because just based on a conversation I had with a self-advocate a few weeks ago, she was talking about how she was having a phone call with someone and they were being quite rude to her. And I can't remember exactly what she was asking for, medical documentation or something. And they were being quite rude to her, and she wasn't sure how to, she didn't feel comfortable sort of coming right out and asking for what she wanted. And so one of the things I was thinking about or suggesting was, not everybody's great on the phone. Not everybody is great sort of conversing verbally with people. And I know that sometimes I'm much better sending something in writing, where I have time to sort of collect my thoughts and word it just the way I like. And so that's what I kind of meant by adding that last bullet point in there, is that if you're maybe not comfortable calling someone and asking for something, send an email, write a letter. And so, those are helpful things, I think, because not everybody is super comfortable with confrontation or saying I have a problem with something and I'd like it to change. And there's lots of different ways that you can ask for things that might be more comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
So that concludes our training. I just wanted to throw out there SUFU and Disability Rights Maine's websites, in case anybody felt like reaching out, or if they had any questions or wanted to get involved. SUFU is just such a wonderful organization, I think, for promoting.
Yep, we're always looking for new members.
So I don't know if there's any questions, or we'll hand it over.
Nothing right now.
Okay.
But we'll have the opportunity at the end as well to follow up with questions. So we will move on to the next presenter. Kyle says, nice job, guys.
Thanks, Kyle.
Okay, am I next?
Tag, you're it, Ellen.
Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, for the rest of the training, we're going to be a little bit more specific. We're going to focus a little bit on, or a lot on technology use. And we're going to try to tie it to a lot of the things that Marco and Lauren talked about in the first part of the session. When COVID-19 hit and people began social distancing, I think there was a general consensus among a lot of different people, family members, people with disabilities, people who worked with agencies, that people needed to connect virtually with other people. People needed access to email and Zoom and Facebook, social media, those kinds of things, because that's how everybody was connecting. Unfortunately, a lot of us work via the internet. And sorry, I hit the wrong button. Okay, a lot of us work through the internet and participate in endless Zoom meetings, it seems, at times. The problem is that for years, there's been a digital divide, and the research has shown that the people with disabilities, especially people with developmental disabilities, don't have the same kind of access to the internet and to social media that other people have, and that can be pretty significant. At the Center for Community Inclusion and Disability Studies at the University of Maine, where I work, we were talking about this. We were talking about issues related to COVID-19 in general, and this issue of people not being able to connect came up, and we thought we need to form a committee that where we talk about what we can do to address this. We need to talk about who else we can connect with. And we called ourselves tentatively the Social Undistancing Committee. And we've done several things. We formed several pilot groups with several agencies. We did an online survey with the Maine Association of Community Providers to find out from some of their members, how are people connecting? Are they connecting? And if so, how? And what are their needs? And we're also collaborating with some other organizations in putting together this webinar. And there are people from the DD Council, Rachel, who's going to be talking later, who is part of our social and distancing committee. What we found in our survey, most agencies said that few of the people they serve access the internet daily. Slightly more access it weekly. So we know that most people aren't accessing the internet, but for those who do, many of the people who do access it through an internet, access it through an agency account. And that's a problem. Amanda in the chat earlier talked about not being able to use the agency internet for telehealth. And that's really important, but it's also really important, for a lot of other things, staying connected socially, staying connected to your family, staying connected with friends. Most people don't have their own internet account. For those who do have access to the internet, most don't have an email address. And that's really important for people to have their own email address for a lot of reasons, including privacy. Most of the people who do access the internet access social media, but about a quarter of the agencies who completed the survey said that less than 25% access social media. And most people aren't accessing the internet independently. Again, that's a problem. Most of the agencies reported there was a moderate to large increase in the internet use of people since COVID-19. And there's an increase in the use of electronic communication by the people they serve. One agency, though, actually reported there's been a decrease. Number of factors limit access by people to the internet and to social media. Lack of devices is a big one. Kathy Adams, I think, is going to talk a little bit about that and how that probably shouldn't be an issue. People can't afford internet access. They have limited access to an agency internet account. They live in a group home and the staff are on the computer entering data and doing whatever they do, and the people can't get on when they need to get on. They may live in an area where they can't get Wi-Fi. There's lack of training or support to the individual to use different platforms and software. Safety concerns about internet use. Many times staff lack confidence or skill in supporting technology. I have a brother who lives in a group home in Pennsylvania, and we set up a family Zoom meeting with him every week. But initially, we were having trouble because the staff said, well, I don't know how to do that. And I said, well, all you have to do is click on that link. And the woman said, well, I think I'm gonna have to wait for somebody else to come in who knows how to do this better. So anyway, it worked out eventually. People may be perceived as not having the cognitive or the communication skills to be able to participate in internet or social media activities. Agencies talked about a lot of things that they need for support. They need devices that make it easier for people to access the social media and the internet. Hands-on training for both staff and for the people they support. Easily accessible funding for equipment. Safety training designed for people with developmental disabilities. Trainings on social media. Support for collaboration across agencies to support social interaction. Support to help people access the internet more independently, and support for people in their own homes. Number of agency concerns: poor internet connections, need for support and troubleshooting, safety and exploitation, accessing illegal material, same concerns for anybody accessing the internet, privacy, inappropriate sexual activity, distancing from daily activity and ADLs due to the pull of social media. And I think that's probably something that many of us can identify with, and know people who get pulled away from, you know, what other people think they maybe should be doing. But the agencies reported, we've met with people from different agencies. We've heard through our survey the kinds of things that people are doing. People are developing agency connections on Facebook. And a lot of different things are really happening. You know, this is sort of just bubbling up. People are sharing photos, they're doing karaoke, they're having live cooking groups, they're going on walks and sharing what they're doing. They're posting a schedule of daily activities at one agency so people can log into the activities. They're exercising together, they're going on virtual tours of museums, national parks. They've got a skill-based curriculum, group activities such as bingo, virtual live Zoom animals, whale watches, puppy cams, FaceTime visits, Zoom meetings, telehealth, dancing to the oldies, agency-sponsored Zoom activities and exercises, sing-alongs, crafting, coffee socials, trivia, and they're encouraging FaceTiming with family and friends on a regular basis. People are also watching videos together. Things that we saw in our pilot included exercise, cooking, karaoke, bingo, watching movies, sharing photos, crafts, puzzles, just getting together and talking about how you're doing. You know, it's great for people who haven't seen each other for a long time to, you know, just get on Zoom and talk with people and just say hi. Virtual family feud, hula hoops contest, bird identification. So people, the agencies have developed a lot of different activities that they're doing. We did some work with a couple agencies where, one in particular where we met with managers to discuss how we could support virtual connecting at their agency. We helped them brainstorm about some online activities. We brainstormed about people they could contact. We facilitated Zoom meetings so that they could practice using Zoom. We developed tutorials on Zoom and FaceTime, and I will share the link for those. We provided feedback about etiquette. Things like, you know, if you're in a Zoom meeting, it's probably best not to have your TV on in the background. And we worked with individuals and staff to identify non-disability specific online activities. And I think that's the thing we're struggling with the most. I think what we're seeing is generally people are trying to recreate the existing disability specific activities that already exist. And what we were hoping, and we're still pushing for this, is how can we use this? How can we use people's connections, you know, on the internet and social media to really expand their social networks? Number of technological barriers, technical knowledge, people don't have email. How do you get email addresses for people safely? No Wi-Fi access, internet speed, some of this is redundant. Lack of access to technology, don't have webcams on the computers that are in the group home offices, so you know people can't see them on Zoom. People living in places where they don't have access, and the cost of Wi-Fi and apps. And this is what I was getting at earlier, and I think is really one of the biggest things we need to be thinking about, and thinking about how we can support this. And that is, how can we support people to connect virtually in ways that are going to increase the size of their social networks? How do we help them become more included in the larger community? And Rachel, I remember we were talking about this a while ago, and you talked about that. And, you know, this represents a really, I think, unique opportunity to do some things that we haven't done before around community inclusion. And we really have to keep our focus on that. What opportunities exist in the virtual world for people to connect with other members of their community? And again, I think that really has to be our focus. What has to happen next? These are some conclusions that we've come up with tentatively. We need to develop individualized, person-centered internet social media plans. Support teams need to provide individualized supports to individuals. We need to provide information to teams about how to obtain and finance appropriate technology. And we need to identify strategies for using the internet to help people make new connections and expand their social networks. People need instruction on the independent use of technology. They need training on specific apps. They need training on the safe use of the internet. They need training and support for staff. And they need training on internet etiquette. We really need to do this one person at a time. Again, like Marco and Lauren were talking about, I think person-centered planning is really important. And I think it has to be authentic person-centered planning. And by authentic person-centered planning, I mean really an exploratory process. It's not coming in saying, okay, these are our goals for the year, and this is what we're going to do. It's talking about what does the person want with his or her life, and how can we support that? And what are we going to do? What are some specific steps are we going to take? Who's going to take those steps when, and what are they going to do? The obstacles. You saw some of the obstacles that agencies report that we're seeing in our pilot. They're so varied. The needs of individuals are so unique. It's really important that we address, how people are connecting virtually, how they're getting connected on social media, how they're using technology to become more included in their community in a very individualized and person-centered way. We need advocacy and self-advocacy to make sure that people are getting the equipment, the training, the access, support they need to participate in the virtual life of their communities. And we need to make sure, and this is where the advocacy can really come in, we need to make sure each person's needs related to internet use and social media are addressed effectively in IEPs, in transition plans, and in person-centered plans. Okay? People need to be saying, parents need to be saying, people with disabilities need to be saying, I need to be able to connect. And these are the supports I need, or we need to talk about the supports I need to be able to do that. And that's what I want to talk about in my transition plan. If I'm going to work, if I'm going to be part of my community, if I'm going to stay connected with my friends, these are the things that I'm going to need. And I need to discuss in this plan how I'm going to be able to do that. This is my contact information. I'm still editing it. We've developed a guide that you can use, questions you can ask as part of a PCP process, a person-centered planning process, about identifying supports that someone needs to connect to the internet and into social media, and how you can really use that to really expand your social connections. We also have on our webpage several tutorials that Bonnie Robinson in our office developed on using Zoom and Messenger. So that's my part of the presentation. Any questions?
Hi, Alan. There's no questions in the chat box, but I had a question that came in my brain. I was just wondering how providers and self-advocates would be able to work with CCIDS to improve access. Are there ways to work with you guys specifically for providers to help implement access, and for self-advocates to get tips on how to advocate for what they need?
I think the thing to do would be to go to our webpage. We've reached out to a number of agencies. Several have gotten back to us, and we've worked with them. So we've really up to now just really stayed fairly focused, trying to learn, what the needs are and what kind of supports that people need. But we certainly want to make supports available to, all agencies over time and to families. I would say check our webpage. Right now, we're talking about putting together a number of briefs where we discuss some of these topics. And there would be briefs, for example, on incorporating technology planning into the person-centered planning process, and resources on easy to use social media or directions for using social media, resources on a lot of different topics. So we're going to be putting some things together. They will be available on our website. Yeah, we're still really in the planning stages, but we can certainly make it available through the Maine Parent Federation, through your website when we develop those things, and you'll be able to find whatever we develop on the website I've listed here.
Great. And I shared the website in the chat box as well. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you.
And I think Kathy is up next.
Thank you. I'm going to pop up my PowerPoint also. Keep me on track for our conversation. Today is July 8th. Holy mackerel. So yes, good morning, everybody. I am going to talk about, hone in a little bit closely on the topic of assistive technology and resources here in the state of Maine. I am Kathy Adams, and I work at the Maine Site program. I'm the director of the Maine Site program. And the Maine Site program is Maine's assistive technology program. Every state in the country has an AT program, and we are it for the state of Maine. The AT programs were created, believe it or not, back in the last century, 25 years ago, by the federal government. The federal government created the assistive technology law back then and funded it. And so we are funded federally. We receive our funding from the federal government through the Maine Department of Education. So we work closely with the DOE. We also work very closely with the Department of Labor and the Department of Human Services and many, many private nonprofits and provider agencies across the state. If you have not looked at our information source, please look at our website, mainsite.org. Carve out 10 minutes or so to look at that and explore it. I think it was mentioned, John Brandt from Maine Site and I, a week or so ago, did a webinar for Maine Parent Federation on the new family guide to assistive technology and accessible educational materials, and that's posted on our site and available. Also in the meat of our website, you will find information and lists of AT providers and consultants in Maine. Lots of information on AT funding and options, alternative funding options. And then we also, just like Maine Parent Federation, we do quite a number of webinars and trainings. That's our thing. In the last quarter, we did 11 of them, and they are all recorded and archived on our website. So you can go back and look at those anytime you want to. An assistive technology device, and I'll hold up one of my key devices right here, my smartphone, but an AT device is any item, any piece of equipment, any system, because nowadays smart home technology is quite often systems of technologies and pieces of equipment in a system, or any product which will make an impact or change the functional capability of an individual with a disability, whether that be a child, whether it be an adolescent, an adult, a senior. But all of the work that we do around assistive technology is geared at impacting function and functional capabilities. And so that's the definition of a device. quite a lot in this day and age. Quite a lot of technology is what we call everyday technology or out-of-the-box technology. Like back to my smartphone. When Apple invented the smartphone device 10, 11, 12 years ago, they never were thinking of people with disabilities, that this was going to be an assistive device. But it certainly has become a very, very important one. Same thing with the tablet device. These devices were never invented for our consumers, but they are make a huge impact on people's functional capabilities. So you have the device, which I just mentioned, the device itself, and equally important are the services, which Alan just talked about, the services around assisting a person to look at devices, look at their options for devices, because sometimes there's 3 or 4 or 5 things that can impact the same functional area, and making an informed decision about which technology will be of the most benefit for them, because sometimes there is no funding source and it's being purchased by the consumer or their family, so they want to make the wisest decision they can. AT, again, the services provided to consumers are back to just that, focusing on impacting function. And I think these were all areas that previous speakers have talked about. The critical area of communication, that goes without saying. Communication is a fundamental life skill and will impact function throughout life. The areas of self-care and homemaking, being able to manage yourself day to day through your own personal care as well as homemaking tasks and chores. Impacting safety and security, impacting productivity if you are working in a job environment or on a job, and in this day and age, maybe teleworking, being a productive teleworker, as well as potentially going back in the office and being productive back in an office or a work environment. Assistive technology can impact the functional area of mobility big time. Very, very important area of technology and equipment. And Alan just mentioned, and I'll reiterate here, the power of using technology to impact social connections and community inclusion. Very, very important. So these are all areas that AT can make a difference with. In Maine, as in many other states under the assistive technology programs, there are a whole bunch of services that have been developed over the last 25 years. We provide lots of information and assistance. Upwards of 150 inquiries a month come into our office, and we, Sherry or John or I, deal with all of those directly one-on-one. We either call the person up and have a direct conversation, or we answer it via email. And so we do lots of information and assistance around AT. We work with AT providers and occupational therapists and speech therapists across the state. Another 2 categories of service, very important, is assistive technology demonstrations and assistive technology loan. And that's where you try out the device before you buy it, the loan part. And I'll talk about that further in a moment. Training about how to use assistive technology is very, very important. And we have a whole webinar on our site that Christine Martin did for us not too long ago about training in the use of assistive technology devices, which is really where the rubber hits the road and people put AT really embed AT into their life every day. Assistive technology recycling. This is, believe it or not, a really big thing across the country, reuse and recycling of assistive technology. And here in Maine, we work with the Spurwink Alltech program to do quite a lot of assistive technology recycling of equipment. And they, on their website, I'm going to mention it on another slide, but Bob Barton keeps track of all the equipment that they're taking in and recycling through that program. And so I'll mention it in a moment. And then the other part of it is, as I talked already, but funding. We don't talk about AT devices and services without making sure that we are always being aware and cognizant of the critical role of funding. Because I'm an occupational therapist, so I could recommend 3 or 4 devices for Alan Kurtz. But if I don't talk with Alan and his family about the funding options that he's got, I haven't really fulfilled my commitment to them to look at their technology, because you're not over the goal line until you get that device and learn how to use it in your life. As a matter of fact, tomorrow, Maine site is doing a webinar with Henry Powell on Maine's adaptive equipment cash loan program. And that's on our website posted if you want to hop on that later and register for that. I think we have over 100 people registered, but there's always room for more. So tomorrow we're doing a whole webinar on the adaptive equipment loan program here in Maine.
Kathy,
Yes.
are you able to share the link to the training for the AT equipment? Is that on your website?
It's coming up. Yep. I've got it coming up on a slide.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Here's mentioned more of the providers. I think I've mentioned a couple already. Spurwink Alltech, the Bureau of Rehabilitation. These are all collaborators of ours. We work with Bureau of Rehab counselors all over the state, as well as the high school transition counselors, which is a critical team of voc rehab counselors across Maine, assigned to all high schools in the state. We work with Alpha One. I just mentioned them. Henry Powell's doing a webinar tomorrow on the loan program, cash loan program. We work with the professionals at the IRIS Network and the AT Center. We've got a webinar in the hopper being planned with Amber Mooney from the IRIS Network about their AT Center. So these are some of the providers that we work with. Disability Rights Maine we work with, which is where Lauren is from, and we work specifically in addition to their attorney team, but we also work with their telephone equipment program loans and their deaf-blind assistive technology loan program. Pine Tree Society is also listed there, and they are a large team of speech pathologists who all work in the field of communication technology. And so we work with Linda Bona and her team. CARES, on the next slide, is CARES Incorporated, and that's Steve Beam in Central Maine. And CARES is one of the agencies that we work with, and they provide assistive technology device demonstrations and lending loans of equipment. And again, that's the try before you buy advantage. Maine AT Solutions is Kelly Spencer up in the Newport area. Kelly's an occupational therapy practitioner who I've known for many years. She and I have worked together, and Kelly does in-home assessments for assistive technology. Works all over the state, very busy, right out straight all the time. And Excel Consulting is Kathy Bagley, and Kathy is her background is in rehab counseling, and she's also certified as an assistive technology provider and does lots of AT services. Gallant Therapy Services is another provider in the Central Maine area with offices in Augusta, Waterville area, and Lewiston. And Ryan Gallant owns that company. Predominantly, he employs occupational therapists and speech therapists, and they're all into AT in this day and age. And in addition, you'll contact many other occupational therapists, speech and physical therapists, and never forget the vendors. We always like to be in touch. That's how we keep in touch with what's coming out into the marketplace for technology. The vendors and the manufacturers are very important in this whole picture of keeping up to date with emerging technologies. Here's a slide on the reuse and recycling, and there's Bob's email and his phone number. Bob Barton oversees and manages the AT Reuse and Recycling Store. It's located on Riverside Street in Portland. His phone number is there, 535-2017, and Robert Barton at our bartender at spurwink.org is Bob's contact, and he will connect you up with equipment. I know someone recently was getting some equipment or finding out if they had equipment, and I think Bob was shuttling photographs back and forth of options and equipment that he had. He was recycling some equipment back out to someone, and usually they sell that at a deep discount. They receive it in and they refurbish it and clean it up and sell it back out. So anyway, that's an example of how Bob is moving equipment quite a bit. Assistive technology devices. This is the website that I mentioned, the Try Before You Buy Advantage, and it's atformaine.org. We run this website. We've run it for a couple of years now, at least 2, maybe going on 3. It's an online resource for the public, for consumers, families, whoever, therapists, teachers. And it's got over 1,200 devices listed on it. And this is where you can review devices, you can get a demonstration of a device, or you can borrow a device. And these 4 agencies, or these 4 organizations on the bottom of the slide, are the 4 agencies that hold all of this technology. John and I do not have it in our little office in Augusta. These agencies contract with Maine Site to oversee the inventory. Spurwink Alltech, CARES, Pine Tree Society, and UMaine Farmington. So if you go on this website, and I'll use the example, go on the website and you've never put your hands on an iPad, but you want to try an iPad before you buy it, or before you have a family member buy it for you. So you go on the website and you research iPads. So there's 50 or 60 iPads in the inventory, but you live closest to Pine Tree Society or CARES. The website will tell you who's your closest agency who's got that iPad device, and it will connect you up. It'll give you their phone number and their email to pursue a direct connection and pursue the borrowing or the to get a loan of that device. And the loans usually last around 3 weeks. That's the average loaner time. In recent months in COVID, when COVID hit back in late March, we had about 80 devices out across the state on loan. And on an immediate basis, none of those were required to come back in 3 weeks, because we were still kind of feeling our way through how this was going to happen. But at this point, we're in the middle of July almost all those devices have come back in. They have been sanitized and re-entered into the inventory. So those 4 providers are all open for business. They're providing assistive technology demos and loans in an adaptive fashion, but they're open for business, and technology is moving. So I thought I'd show you, and we talk about some technology devices. And this particular slide I wanted to mention because I worked with a SUFU group some years back, and I had in my mind all about the technology that I thought they would be interested in. And in the particular group I was working with at that time, they were all more and more so interested in bathroom safety and mobility safety around their home. And so on this particular slide, there are 3 slides. On the top right is just a simple safety bar on the toilet, a safety bar on the tub on the bottom, and a safety bar for getting in and out of bed on the bottom left. And these are all very simple, easy pieces of equipment to access. They used to be called medical equipment, and I think they probably still are, but I believe any one of these can be purchased right off the internet on Amazon. In fact, I know it. I know they can be at very, very affordable costs. On the top left is an adaptive kitchen. So sometimes it's not necessarily equipment that a person needs, but the person's home might warrant a modification to it. So that is showing a modification to the kitchen sink where the plumbers came in and modified all the piping underneath the sink, and the carpenters put in a certain type of cabinetry that was able to open up and then slide in under the sink to make it a full opening, so that a person who's trying to work in the kitchen from their wheelchair would operate and function at the sink. So those are just some easy examples to think about. Here's where we get into a little bit more technology, a little bit more expense. The mechanical lift on the top left side is warranted because someone needs to get into their house and up to a higher deck level. So they're going from the ground level up to the deck. And so they're using that platform lift, which is shown there on the top left corner, left picture. The central one is a modular ramping system, which some people need to have on a permanent basis or a temporary basis. And so those are available. And then on the right-hand picture, way over on the right, and this is a very common piece of equipment. Having made home visits for 25 years, I saw many of these in people's homes, and that's a stair glide device, enabling someone to just safely ride up the stairway and maximize their safety, obviously, as they get upstairs. Because quite often in our older homes in Maine, the bedrooms and the bathrooms are upstairs. And so we have to have access to those. So we modify the environment. These devices, every once in a while, do come through the Alltech recycling program, believe it or not, and they are reusable. It's a nice piece of equipment. The top of this slide is an example of some of the telephone equipment program you might find when you work with Deb Rogers and Lisa Penny at Disability Rights Maine. The top phone device on the left is a picture phone. So if someone might not have the capacity to remember phone numbers, they just put a picture. So that might be my 3 sisters on the top and my aunt and uncle and my mom and whoever it might be, but you have the ability to put pictures in there, and the program, the telephone gets pre-programmed for those numbers, so that if I want to call my sister, I just hit her picture with my finger and that will automatically dial in. That's also a speakerphone. On the top right is a telephone device with, as you can see, it's got a small little, like a tablet screen with writing on it, so that this is for someone who has a significant hearing impairment or maybe deaf, and so they can read the text of the person they want to talk to coming across the screen to them. You would use the main relay for that conversation, but it enables private conversations to occur. On the bottom left is an iPad tablet with a communication app on it. This particular tablet revolutionized communication technology. I think the speech therapists in the state would probably agree with me on that, I hope. And this made all kinds of new options available for people with communication challenges to begin to communicate more effectively. And then on the right-hand picture is just the smartphone device, which has become so adaptable for people with disabilities. More technology here. On the top left is the, oh, Alan, help me, Afari. Am I right? It's the Afari. And it was invented by Liz DePoy and Stephen. Help me. Thank you, Alan. And it's an adaptive 3-wheeled. It's kind of like a walker because there's not a seat there. You're standing up as you're moving along that pathway, and but it's an adaptive walker mobility recreation device, and we have one of these on the inventory, atformaine.org, if you ever wanted to see it or borrow it or try it out. And over on the right-hand side is adaptive beach equipment, waterproof wheelchair equipment to enable people to get into the water, whether it be the lake or the ocean. And down on the bottom right is a modified adaptive gardening. These are all raised bed gardens to enable people who might have mobility issues to continue gardening. And then on the left-hand side is a gardening sitting device. instead of getting down on your knees and down on the ground. It enables you to work at a sitting height. Big issue around assistive technology on the top left is medication management. We also have a webinar on our website, a 1-hour webinar that explores 15 different devices available in the market. And Christine Martin did that also. And so medication management may or may not be an issue for you, but believe it or not, it is a big issue. And so there are lots of technologies available that enable people to tackle that and to take command of their medication that they have to have on a daily basis. So that's great technology to have available. And we have a number of those devices are available on the inventory to look at and to try out. Very reasonably priced too. I think Christine prices them on her webinar, but most of these devices are well under $30, $40, $50. So for something like that, why not be able to take control over your medication devices and be in charge of them yourself? On the right-hand side is an adaptive magnifier, handheld magnifier, enabling an individual to, obviously, as it shows you, to look at a label, small print label, and to be able to read those instructions with the handheld magnifier. This magnifier is a little bit more techy. It also will speak those directions. So if you do have a visual impairment, it will also, you can hit the button and the device will talk what it's reading. Take 2 tablets, take after meals, for best results, that type of thing. On the bottom left is a smartwatch. Wearable technology is very, very important in this day and age. It allows you to be hands-free. And this is a smartwatch device that this one also in the fine print, I'm seeing that it's kind of like a telehealth device. It's monitoring heart rate, and these devices can monitor heart rate. They can monitor oxygen. They can do all kinds of be used within the realm of telehealth to maintain and monitor health. Over on the right bottom is an insole called the Smart Sole, and it's a GPS tracking insole device used by some individuals if they are at risk of being lost or leaving an area. This insole device is a useful piece of assistive technology for finding people that may have inadvertently become lost. We already talked about this. I think everybody on the panel has talked about this, but hey, I had to talk about it too. The core of service delivery around assistive technology or any service delivery is person-centered, consumer-directed decision-making. This has been a core of the work I've done for the last 35 years. I worked for 25 years at the Maine, at Alpha One, the Center for Independent Living, and that is the core of service delivery of the Centers for Independent Living, consumer-directed decision-making. Self-determination. Once the consumer has all the information they need to have, they make those decisions and determine their own direction in life. Another concept which comes into play with constituents of all ages is the dignity of risk. Professionals are not the experts. The consumer is the expert on his or her life. And we must be respectful of the dignity of risk. And I was having a conversation not too long ago in this time of COVID. That's all we're doing is managing our lives and managing the risk in our lives. Right now, we're still into heavy risk management. There are no vaccines. And even then, it'll still be risk management, but being respectful of the dignity of risk. And I learned many lessons around the dignity of risk when my mom was aging and lived to be the age of 96 years old and didn't really want to have too many suggestions from her occupational therapist daughter. So she maintained her dignity of risk, and I understood what that respect, I came to understand what that respect was. I want to mention here a little bit about telepractice. We've talked about it, but in my mind, again, from a techie standpoint, telepractice to me involves live video connections. Yes, it can be a telephone call, but true telepractice, in my definition, Kathy Adams only, is live audio and visual connections, to be able to see the person, read their body language, see their face, and have a true connection and dialogue together around issues of telehealth or telecare. Smart home technology, can't forget that. That's part of the realm of all the devices that we talk about. And smart home technology is, again, out of the box. And it enables the individual who has a disability to take command of their environment, run their appliances, run the lighting, even run the curtains on the windows, be able to remote control the curtains, manage the thermostat, manage the television, manage the security lights outside your home. Smart home technology allows you to break down the physical barriers of your environment and allows you to take control of it, most commonly by voice control, sometimes by switches, but most commonly by voice control. And ultimately, as we've said all along, it's going to enable you to make social connections and combat the isolation that people with disabilities face, sometimes in life anyway, but certainly in the last 4 months. And ultimately, again, back to impacting function, independence, and safety. We've talked about apps, and we have a whole section on our website on apps. Please visit that. Apps can definitely be assistive. There's no doubt about it. I use them all the time on my, the biggest one I use on my phone to keep me straight is my alarm app. I've got 4 more alarms set for the day because I've got a bunch of more meetings, so that keep me on track. But these are a number of apps, Mindshift, Calm, Headspace are all anxiety management and relaxation apps. And you know, those are big issues in this age and time. Anxiety management and relaxation. The Evernote and 3030 and CanPlan, all 3 of those are really very good organizing apps, sequencing and managing tasks. And so those are very good apps for those types of challenges. Again, back to the medication, there's 2 of them there, Medication Helper and Pill Reminder. These are all apps you can put on your phone. And I mentioned on the bottom, when I'm exploring a new app or I find out about a new app, I go right to YouTube and I find a YouTube clip that shows me how to run that app. And it's usually being shared by an individual with a disability who actually is making their own YouTube clip to show how the app works for them. So I just wanted to put a plug in for apps and exploring those and utilizing YouTube as a resource for how the app might work. Finding assistive technology, we've talked about that earlier. That's a challenge for people. I've been in this field for 30 years and I'm still finding assistive technology. We're always looking at emerging technologies. So contact us at Maine site, John and Sherry and I. We do a lot of research for people. We're learning for ourselves as well as people we work with. And then also don't forget the resource atformaine.org when you're exploring the actual hands-on and the demonstration part of using technology. Work with your medical equipment vendors here in Maine. Go into the showroom. There are several of them across the state. They have showrooms with equipment in it. Feel free to go in and explore what equipment is available. I'm finding in this day and age, whether it's good or bad, Amazon is a huge purchasing source for equipment, and usually free delivery and all of that comes with Amazon. And then don't forget YouTube as far as learning how to use technologies and devices and apps. I was thinking, Alan, when you were talking about some of the goals and some of the things that CCIDS wants to, you guys could create some good YouTube clips. You were talking about, information sheets, but you could make some 5 or 8 minute YouTube clips that could be posted. And that would be a nice way, because again, it gives you the audio and the visual experience of seeing something in action. Paying for assistive technology. As I've said earlier, this is where the rubber hits the road. Go to our website. We have lots of resources and information about paying for assistive technology. Alpha One, the Center for Independent Living, has an IL grant program. They have a waiting list, but absolutely always get on the waiting list. You may eventually get a phone call that you've got resources available. They also run the state of Maine's cash loan, adaptive equipment loan program. And as I said, Henry will be doing a webinar tomorrow for us on that, details of that. The Robbie Foundation here in Scarborough, Maine, makes grants available for assistive technology for children, early intervention, I think through 20. Is that the age through 20 maybe? The Robbie Foundation, explore their grants opportunities on their website. And then in Maine, we have the advantage of having 5 Maine Care waivers that cover assistive technology. And those waivers are all detailed on the state of Maine's website for the Maine Care benefits manual, and they're all outlined there. But we have 5 Maine Care waivers that provide AT services. And I can tell you from experience in working with other state directors, we are way ahead of other states in that regard. And that's the end of me. There I am right there. The sun's not out today in South Portland, but that's what it normally looks like. Thank you. And there's my email for people that want to send me a note or a question. Thank you. Any questions?
Awesome, Kathy. I don't see any questions at this time. And I put your links in the chat box as well that you provided on that last slide.
Okay.
So those are up there. I also provided the link to your website where your trainings are. So that website link that I provided lists all Maine site upcoming trainings as well as their archived trainings. So that page should get you the information on those that are coming up and things that have happened in the past, so you can watch them. And I think with that, we are moving on to Rachel.
Great. Thanks so much, Carrie, and Kathy, and Alan, and Marco, and Lauren. And thank you all for being here today. I'm really excited to just take a couple of minutes to talk about one of the most exciting things that projects that I've had the opportunity to be a part of. I work for the Maine Developmental Disabilities Council, and we are a advocacy and systems change organization located in Augusta, but operating statewide. And our charge is to kind of make things better for folks with developmental disabilities. We have some federal funding and are quite a bit of flexibility with how we do our work. And some of the flexibility came about was as the COVID emergency unfolded, our funders said, councils, it's really important that you do some COVID related work, and we'd like to give you some more flexibility on how you use your resources. Typically, in order to do projects, we have like a pretty long planning period, and we do a lot of systems review, and we were really just able to respond to what was happening. But we're not an emergency management agency. We're not a service provider. So probably maybe the first week, I think maybe the very last day we were physically in our office as we were figuring out what we were going to do. How are we going to work remotely? Oh my gosh, what's going to happen? We were having a conversation, and we said, man, this staying at home business really makes it clear that video technology is just critical to social connection. We don't know when we're going to see the people that we care about again, but we're able to see them and talk to them through the internet. And the question said, well, what about people with developmental disabilities? And he knew right away. I've worked with SUFU for a long time. I've been the staff person supporting our SUFU contract for a long time, and I knew that people didn't have anywhere near the same kind of access that that people without disabilities do. And I think we've really heard that message loud and clear from Marco and from Alan and from Kathy. So we thought about this and said, well, what can we do and what can we do quickly? So we said, well, what about iPads? We're gonna use some funds and we're gonna purchase some iPads and we're gonna ask people to apply for them. So we said, well, what are our goals? We really want, oh, I need to share my screen and put my PowerPoint up here. I went to a lot of trouble to make this PowerPoint and now I'm not sharing it. How very much like me. That I need to share my screen before there we go. Share screen. Okay, sorry about that. And put you up big. Big, I want you big. All right, there we go, super. So we wanted people to have access to self-advocacy as the self-advocacy organization was transitioning from an in-person network to an online network. We wanted people to be able to access that. We wanted people to have access to educational opportunities as those were moving online. We really wanted people to have access to social contact, to be able to use social media, and to be able to access services and telehealth, or that wasn't the word Kathy used, but it became the way that people were getting things. So we, in a really short period of time, we chose iPads for exactly the reason that Kathy referenced, is that they just have a lot of intrinsic accessibility, and that we were able to do it. We sent one email. I sent one email to 34 people, and we got over 450 applications in a week. I mean, I didn't do any outreach at all. And that really told us that the need was great, but the need was really great. I did not expect that to occur. And we processed those applications. Just about every single person was a person with a developmental disability living in the state of Maine. That was there was that criteria, and you needed to have access to Wi-Fi. And that wasn't because we didn't know that Wi-Fi was a problem. It's just we did not have the capacity to deal with that barrier, and to move these things out really quickly. And we worked with the Center for Community Inclusion and Disability Studies around technical assistance, and Spurwink All Tech. We're going to give them another shout out because they were amazing. I'm not so sure that we wouldn't still have these things in our office if they hadn't helped get them to people. So 148 devices went to people. Primarily adults, although and that was because about 90% of the applications were from adults, and that was not because there wasn't that there aren't huge gaps for children and youth. It was very clear to us that that families had really variable degrees of access to technology that's provided by schools that kids really need to use, but for probably just because of how the information went out, that was what occurred. That it was primarily adult applicants. And initially, we have a person who is helping us. I'm so happy about this. A student who's helping us with doing some evaluation, and we're really still kind of in the middle of this project. Maybe maybe more than, but it's certainly the evaluation piece is really hasn't even really occurred yet. But some of the initial outcomes, the two people that really came to mind were two people who are middle-aged women, and I point that out because they were not people who grew up at a time when using technology would have been something that they did in school. Both of them live alone, and both of them have little local family or in providing support. Both of them have diagnoses of, have experienced intellectual disabilities, and neither one of them had a whole lot of experience with, didn't have any experience with Apple technology, and didn't have, and had, successfully used the phone mostly, and were engaged in self-advocacy. And in pretty short order, both of them were really, they were really positive about it. Like, we're able to use it to participate in self-advocacy. We're using it for services, and we're using it for other types of socialization. Some of I got some additional feedback about that from the person who kind of helped kind of get these things set up. And I thought that really the feedback that I thought was pretty interesting was that the person who was helping said she was on they were working with the iPad, but also on the phone, and she could tell that it was working, and she really got it. Just the tone of her voice changed. Like, wow, oh wow, yeah, here it is. So that was it was really just, it was exciting to see. We asked people who receive these things, how has it changed your life? And I'm not going to read these things to you, and I just want to say that these are the words that people used. So, verbatim, I didn't do any editing, but essentially that people have more access. That was exactly what we wanted. The second one was on behalf of someone, which really really indicated to us that people really increased people's independence. That one button, I could Skype with my mother. We heard from another person who actually used, I think, their stimulus money to buy an iPad, and the individual was calling their family, like had never done it before. His whole life was calling his family through the picture. And the other piece that we really noticed through some of these comments was what we'd already known through the application process, was that people's understanding of the availability of assistive technology is not that great, and their ability to access it really wasn't that good. Our goal with this project was to put just typical technology in people's hands quickly. It was not to do assistive technology assessments, and it wasn't to provide professional and clinical expertise related to it. So, and we really want to refer those people to assistive. But even so, actually, people, people with the limited questions that we asked, were obtained those things, and obtained the iPads, and were able to use them that way without a whole lot of assistance. The ability to see people was really noted to be important. I don't feel so alone. I don't feel so isolated. I can see my doctor, a family member talking about it impacting some behavioral challenges, and again, the faces, the screen is bigger. So some of it, again, is assistive technology, that we heard from people who had, oh, where did my other slide go? Oh, here we go. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I somehow skipped that one over. So the lessons that we've learned so far are, everybody has said the need is great. It's greater than we imagined, that the digital divide is wide, deep and wide, and it's getting wider. People are getting left behind. It was pretty clear that there was difficulties in access for children because of just the great variability of how schools approached it, and that small children, whose families didn't have resources, were really left out in the cold. I spoke with some provider organizations who had used various resources, outside of this project to access tablets for people, and the feedback was, really that people really did better, much better than anybody expected them to. That it was really the problem of low expectations that we talked about at the very beginning. I think that Marco mentioned, you know, it was pretty obvious that that's really a systemic problem. Again, the issue of the competence of the people who are supporting people is a real problem. That, you know, that for folks who needed somebody to help them, that they needed to have somebody who knew how to help them, and there certainly were a small minority of people who had staff people who either couldn't or wouldn't like try to figure this out. And maybe one of the biggest messages or lessons that we've gotten, I mean, it ties into all of this, is that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, of the folks that we've dealt with, is some people, especially the people who live alone or without a lot of support, need technical assistance. They need assistance that is not the kind that you get from calling the Apple store. They need assistance like with setting it up. They need assistance with setting up email, with practicing how to use, like, oh, where's the mute button? You know, I mean, you know, obviously, I mean, I left my the PowerPoint off of here, and this is like after like 4 months of you know, doing this regularly. But you know, that being able to have that type of support is pretty critical, and it's not necessarily a really intensive kind of support, but it's necessary for some folks to. And it felt like, I don't know, we'll see how the information comes out. And it felt like a barrier in that you know, people assumed that they would either need so much that it wasn't even worth doing, or you know, or that they could be immediately completely independent. And lots of folks just have not had the same experiences that we've had of like having, oh, my phone's broken, I need to upgrade my phone, and now I need to learn this new platform. So so that is some of the stuff that we've learned. It's been really, really rewarding to say, you know, and also depressing, because there's, you know, we could have done it 3 or 4 times over easily. And we hope that that some of the, you know, the outcomes of this will help us like support policy that will make it easier to get this day-to-day technology into people's hands, and to support people's needs to have easy access to assistive technology. Once again, thank you to our partners who have the university has continues to work on with some of these individuals for technical assistance, and I would, you know, if Alltech is a terrific resource for all issues related to assistive technology. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Rachel. I don't see any current questions right now, but I'm going to go ahead and launch the end of the webinar polling for people to start to fill out. And if you guys could just hang on with us for a few minutes while people do that, but also may think of other questions that come to mind. I'll continue to monitor the chat box. Dylan did put in the chat box a link to where on Facebook you'll be able to find the recorded webinar once we finish up here today. We'll also have it up on our webpage with the PowerPoint presentation from Maine site, which I know has been a question that's been asked. You can also email me if you'd like me to send you the PowerPoint presentation. I will put my email address in the chat box. I'd be able to send that out to you today, or you can wait. We'll have the PowerPoint on our website as well as the recorded webinar YouTube link by the end of this week. So either way, you can access it in that way, shape, and form. I also want to let everybody know that every organization that's participating in this webinar today represents the family, parent, as well as self-advocate voice. And I know sometimes it's hard to speak up for yourself, so represent yourselves at a legislative level on your own. And we're always willing to hear and share your stories, as we do sit at a lot of those tables. So if you're hesitant to do that on your own or don't know the avenues in which to do that on your own. Any one of our agencies can help to guide you in doing that. I think there is no more crucial time than now to be hearing from self-advocates as to what your challenges are, especially in the adult world. We hear every day about the transitioning back to school, and there are a lot of voices at that table, although I will say it's been difficult to get the parent voice at that table, but there are a lot of voices at that table, and our self-advocates in adult world, the hearing that they feel like they've been left behind is not the first time that we've heard that today. And so all of our agencies are here and available to you to help to move your agenda forward as best that we can and make sure that we're representing your voice, and we will always respect your anonymity. So please do not hesitate to reach out to any one of our agencies if you want to share your stories, but want to keep yourself anonymous or just looking for avenues in which you can share your stories. We will help to guide you to do that, because our jobs are to get your stories to the people who make the decisions. So, and I hope I didn't step on anybody's toes, but I don't think I did. I think I know everybody who is attending this webinar would agree with me in that statement. Thank you for continuing to fill out the poll. I want to thank all of our participants today. I would say that the one thing that this pandemic has done has brought our agencies even closer together, and the partnerships that have formed as Zoom fatigue sets in, the partnerships that have formed will always continue to hopefully benefit our families, our self-advocates, and our providers as we move forward to provide you with information even beyond this pandemic. While we worked closely with all these agencies in the past, I feel like our partnerships have gotten stronger. And so it's kind of a silver lining to what is a crappy situation. But I want to thank you all for participating and taking the time out of what I know is a very busy time in your day, and allowing the information to be provided to our families and providers. So thank you all. And let me just check in on my chat box here. Could I receive a certificate? So I am going to put in the chat box two email addresses. You can either one, to send requests for certificates. I'm putting them both in because they alternate vacation time, and either one of them can get you the certificate and there won't be a gap. Deb Epperson and Deb Newcup can email you a certificate. So if you could email them with your request, we would be happy to send you out a certificate. We can send it out to you in the mail or email version. So please let us know which one you would like, and we'll get that sent out to you. And I don't see any other questions at this time. I can hang out for a little bit longer as people continue to finish up the poll. I'll keep it up, but at this point, if you don't have any other questions and our panelists don't have any other information to relay to you, we will wrap up the webinar. And again, thank you all for attending today, and I hope the sunshine returns soon.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you, Marco. You were awesome.
Good job, Marco.
You have a fan club.
I was just going to say, can I join? I'll be the head of the Marco fan club.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.